All right. Welcome, everybody, to our 2 p.m. Eastern presentation on treatment optimization. Um, we are very happy to have you all here. We have over 300 folks signed up for this. We'll see how many folks actually join. Anybody want to throw into the chat what their guess is of what that total people might be? This would be a good time. We're at 112 now. If you just kind of play this like a gambling game, what do you think? I'll throw in a number that I think might actually show up, and we'll see. Price is Right rules. Oh, wow. Somebody went with 352. I can only hope. All right. Just getting people started using that chat about what they think that number might be. I am Brian Jordan with the Office of the Secretary of Defense. So I work out of the Office of the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Environmental Management and Restoration. I have about little under 30 years of experience in the DoD cleanup program, and I'm very happy to welcome you all to this optimization discussion. At the conclusion of today's training, we'll share the post-webinar survey. If you have the time, please provide your feedback to this survey to help my office and the DSMOA team structure and inform content for future webinars. So it is important to us. I highly stress that that survey is important to get the content you all need in future presentations. I would also like to let folks know that today's event is being recorded, and that's so that we can post snippets or break this up into chapters and place it on DNext. And I believe Rebecca's going to throw the DNext link into the chat if she hasn't already. And there it is there. Also at that page are all the materials for this. So quite often we have people going, can I get the slides? Can I get the slides? It's all right there on the DIRT page. I just checked. If you go to that DIRT page, you just slide down a little bit and you'll have all those links. There's also an acronyms list that should be helpful because, as you know, this is a DoD presentation in cohort with our stakeholder partners, and we'll be using too many acronyms, and folks will be going, I don't know what you're talking, but hopefully that acronym list that we provided that goes along with this training will be helpful. All right, next slide, please. All right, some quick webinar rules. Microphones and cameras are automatically turned off for all attendees. The chat function on Teams should be used for general discussion and answering and check-in questions. We have scheduled an open discussion at the end of the training, so that doesn't mean hold your questions until the end, but that just means we will try to address them. If we can't address them through a reply in chat, then we will try to address them in a Q&A at the end of the training. And this is so that we can try to make sure we get through the full content of the training. Please use the react function to gauge during the webinar. If I say something really funny, please let me know I said something funny. I doubt you will, but if you could, that'd be great. If you experience technical difficulties, please reach out to the DoD webinars at bah.com, and we will try to troubleshoot your issues with you. So please, if you are having a technical issue with the Teams environment or this webinar, reach out to that email, and I believe that email has been posted as well into the chat, if you can see the chat. In the survey, she just threw the survey into the chat as well. So if you can only attend half of the training, please fill out the survey and just let us know you only were able to watch half of it. Again, we are recording it, so if you want to watch the second half, please go to the DIRT page and you can watch the second half. All right, next slide. So quickly through our agenda. As you can see, our agenda is pretty packed. We'll do welcoming, that's what we're doing now, and then we'll do an overview that I'll try to lead a little bit of, and then have some of the components come in and talk and have a perspective from the states as well. Talk about optimization data needs, metrics to evaluate treatment options or optimization, treatment optimization success stories. I think a lot of you will be very interested in those. And then we'll try to get into that open discussion and some closing remarks. I will be providing that general overview. so that folks, that if you don't understand the DoD's cleanup program, I am not saying I'm going to make you an expert today on it, but at least you have some framework of knowledge of where DoD comes from for cleanup. Our DoD and state speakers will provide an overview of their perspectives on treatment optimization processes, data needs, evaluation metrics, and optimization success stories. Next slide. So who are our speakers? In addition to me, we have some great experts in the field that support the different DoD components, as well as state RPMs that are willing to provide the perspective of how the states view optimization. First up, we have Mr. Carl Harms, who's an environmental engineer with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Key part there is it says U.S. Army. And he resides out of the EMCX, provides environmental engineering support for a broad range of DoD efforts, including optimization. And then we have Mr. Nathan DeLong, who's the acting environmental or installation restoration program managers at the Naval Facilities Engineering Systems Command, or NAVFAC headquarters. It is also responsible for Navy's optimization guidance policy and reporting. And the next slide, we have with AVCEC, or the Air Force, we have Dr. Kent Glover, the Air Force subject matter expert for remedial systems engineering, and provides leadership in remedy selection, implementation, performance, and evaluation and optimization. And then we have Mr. Dennis Shepard, who's a geologist with the Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation, or DEC. In the Contaminated Sites Program, he serves as the state's Defense State Memorandum of Agreement Program Manager, and Dennis has worked in the environmental field for more than 20 years. And then we have Mr. Dustin McNeil, is the unit leader of the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, CDPHE, and Federal Facilities Remediation and Restoration Unit, and serves as the primary POC for Colorado's DSMELA. All right, so that's our people. Let's go ahead and dive into a DERP overview and some webinar goals. So the Defense Environmental Restoration Program. So what is that? DoD is committed to protecting human health and the environment by conducting cleanup under federal law through the DERP, or the Defense Environmental Restoration Program. DERP addresses cleanup at active installations, formerly used defense sites, properties, base realignment and closure locations, and National Guard sites. Active installations are currently in service and being regularly used by military activities. FUDS properties are properties that were under the jurisdiction of the Secretary of Defense and owned by, leased to, or otherwise possessed by the United States at the time of the actions leading to contamination by hazardous substances, and transferred from DoD control prior to October 17, 1986. BRAC locations are installations that are being or have been closed or are being realigned by BRAC, but are still under the jurisdiction of the DoD. And those properties that have transferred out of the DoD by the BRAC process, but where the DoD retained restoration responsibilities. National Guard sites, this is somewhat new. If you are older in the program, National Guard sites have been in and then out, and now they're back in, are now eligible for cleanup pursuant to Section 312 of the NDAA, or National Defense Authorization Act, for fiscal year 2024. So we did a lot of work to try to get the National Guard sites back in. This was really directed for PFAS, but we've expanded that to not only just be PFAS, but it's for contamination, legacy contamination associated at National Guard sites, pursuant to that section of the NDAA. DoD conducts cleanup under the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, or CERCLA, and DERP authorities. Response actions pursuant to DERP must be in accordance with CERCLA. DoD may conduct environmental restoration pursuant to Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, or RCRA, corrective action, but DoD still must follow all the CERCLA requirements. So what does that mean? That means that DoD is really, the way that the DERP authorization is written, is that DoD will follow the CERCLA Superfund guidance. Does that mean that we will not clean up a RCRA site? No, we will. If it's a legacy RCRA corrective action, then DERP may come in and handle that legacy contamination and proceed, but we will need to be following and underneath those DERP, or I'm sorry, underneath the CERCLA guidance, right? Make sure we cross all the T's and dot all the I's. So next slide, DoD, or the DERP process in general. So again, I'll remind folks, DoD follows CERCLA cleanup process to identify, investigate, and respond to releases. All cleanups under CERCLA or RCRA will substantially satisfy the requirements of both programs. Prioritization of cleanup actions are done by using a long-standing nationwide risk-based approach. DoD works with federal, state, and local governments and the public to select its cleanup actions. The link provided on this slide provides additional information on DoD's activities under DERP. So this is the same link as far as where I sent you for the materials for this particular slide deck and for this presentation, but there's also other materials. If you're looking for status and different pieces, the DEP ARC is there, and some of the status tables related to our annual report to Congress, or data associated with the status of the cleanup program is all there at the DERP website. All right, next slide. So our phases and milestones. So for many of you, I hope, we're at 202. That's awesome. Anybody playing the math game? I see a few folks have entered in a number. This is Price is Right rules. So I'll say for the one who said 350 something, you need to start calling people to attend. But so DERP process, this slide represents kind of a flow chart of the CERCLA process. Should not be foreign to most folks who have any time in the cleanup program, or even if it's a cleanup program outside of DoD, quite often a Superfund program, you would see this very same type of phase and milestone chart where you work from a PA through the SI, the remedial investigation, feasibility study, on through your RAC, REO, or remedial action, construction and operation, to the long-term monitoring. So looking at some of these milestones, those are the ones here in blue with the little, looks like a pyramid shaped upside, or a farmhouse turned upside down. That's our milestones there. We talk about investigation and cleanup. We really look at those activities prior to a decision document as being part of the investigative phase, and those activities after cleanup, or after the decision document, is the cleanup phase. And then you'll notice in the little box to the left, we have interim removal and remedial actions, and those can be implemented at any time during this process as we find information that would lead us to needing to take an immediate action. All right, so we will go next slide. So what are some of the treatment optimization definition DoD's interests? Why do we care? Treatment optimization includes efforts to identify and implement actions that improve the effectiveness and cost efficiency of a proposed remedy, and improves the remedy's progress towards site completion. Aspects of treatment optimization include engaging with an expert multidisciplinary team, applying optimization principles to all phases in a project's life cycle, balancing remedy operations and associated cost, evaluating conceptual site model information, and assessing site goals and exit strategies. The department uses treatment optimization to better protect the environment and public health, reduce DERP program and project costs, meet and exceed DoD cleanup goals, and implement more sustainable remedies. So all of these things, when we talk optimization, it's to try to evaluate what's best for the cleanup program to move the project through the next phase and get us to a cleaned up site and look at our exit strategies for how are we going to maintain that site and put that site, either if it's an active site, maybe into a new munitions use or new mission use, or put it into if it's a FUD site, how do we get it back to the public's use endpoint? Next slide. All right, here's a little bit of some participant engagement here. So this one here might be a little bit of a test because I haven't really talked about this. And this, I always loved professors who would throw a few questions onto a test that they didn't really cover. They're like, use your brain. Let's see if you can, what you would propose for some of these answers. Which phases of the circular process, and please, to answer this, just put A, B, or C, and then write a quick answer for our number 2. Which phases of the circular process would most likely include an optimization component? A, PASI, LTM, RC, B, RIFS, C, RD, RAO. See a lot of C's. See a few C's. Quite a few folks are on board with C. When might you use design and remedy optimization in LTM? All right, I saw an A. There's a few B's rolling in. That's good. All right, anybody want to offer up? Oh, did I have a design typo? All right, Carla had A, B, and C. She's like, this is a trick question. All the answers are good. All right, so I will go with, I'll provide what I think the answers are, which go ahead, Rebecca, I believe we actually highlight them. I believe the most appropriate phases would be the RIFS or RD and RAO. Could you use some optimization components for LTM? Sure, if you were in LTM and you notice that your, and that gets back to here, when would you use it for LTM? And I don't know that. Yeah, so that's a good one. So when new information warrants a revision or when it's not functioning as expected. So if you're an LTM and you're seeing that your system, usually LTM, you've already met your goals or your objectives, but if something has changed, your CSM has fundamentally changed, your land use scenario changed, or you're no longer in a protective state, you may need to look towards optimization to really look at your remedy and how do we get to that next state. Really appreciate you all throwing your ideas in there. So great engagement with that, and we'll look for some more of that as we go through the webinar. All right, some training goals. What are we looking to get accomplished today? So the purpose of today's training is to engage with the DoD cleanup community and provide a high-level overview of treatment optimization and how DoD conducts it. The training will also provide an overview of data needs and metrics to evaluate treatment optimization efforts. We will also share treatment optimization success stories. Now, hopefully you all understand that with a 2-hour block, we are not going to be able to make any one person a DoD or an expert in treatment optimization, but we are trying to hit the highlights of how DoD approaches optimization, and look for engagement with you all if there are specific topics you would like us to hit on in future trainings. So that survey becomes very important, and I'll drive you back to the survey, because I know people don't like to fill out surveys, but it really is helpful for us to understand what you all might be interested in the future. We're at 214. I don't know if anybody's seen a number higher than 214 yet. That's awesome. So overview of DoD component process. We'll go to the next. So here we have the DoD components in their different processes. You'll notice we have Army, Navy, and the Air Force represented. So included on the slide are the policies and guidance documents that inform the department's treatment optimization efforts. Policies such as the DIRT manual, so in the blue box above. So what are some of the overarching policies? So the DIRT manual, the Office of Management and Budget Circular A131, and the Environmental Protection Agency's 5-year review guidance inform optimization efforts across DoD. Each DoD component may also issue additional optimization policy and guidance specific to their unique missions and requirements. All right, and here are a few examples of that from the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, and some of those specific guidance. So next slide. So what are some of the available tools and resources? DoD leverages available tools and resources when navigating the treatment optimization process. OSD created the Treatment Optimization Resource Matrix to help organize these available resources. The matrix compiles resources from DoD, the Association of State and Territorial Solid Waste Management Officials, or SWAMO, the Interstate Technology and Regulatory Council, ITRC, the U.S. Department of Energy, and the EPA. Also included on this slide are the links to resources that each DoD component uses during their optimization efforts. Regulators may also leverage these resources when evaluating optimization efforts in their states. For example, Alaska DEC often refers to the ITRC guidance and resources. So this resource matrix at the top, that very first bullet, that is hyperlinked to the DIRT page where that can be found. This was something that was an outgrowth of the DSMOA steering committee, and that's where really this optimization group comes from, as a subgroup of the DSMOA steering committee. All right, next slide. All right, before I get into the next slide, I just wanted to throw this up as a reminder of our process, right? So quick, it's always good to kind of quickly throw back up one of the key things. So we'll be talking about the different aspects of optimization in each individual phases. So where do we see these elements at? Next slide. So treatment optimization, how does DoD look at that? Treatment optimization involves balancing cost and system effectiveness to achieve cleanup goals, integrating optimization into all phases of a project's life cycle, considering and adapting to changing site conditions, projected and actual costs, and stakeholder concerns. The department considers treatment optimization in 3 stages: design, remedy, and monitoring. These stages may also correspond with specific CERCLA phases. For example, design optimization is most likely considered in the FS and initial RD phases. The DoD components may integrate remedy optimization later in the RD and RA phases. And finally, DoD considers monitoring optimization during the REO and LTM phases. Treatment optimization is an iterative process where DoD not only collects data and adjusts optimization efforts within each stage, design, remedy, and monitoring, but each subsequent stage informs the next. So sometimes you may be needing, like we mentioned, if at the LTM you're no longer protective, you may need to go all the way back to the design optimization to figure out a new design to get you to where you need to be. Hopefully we don't end up there, but sometimes that can happen. So just wanted to highlight, this is a pretty good figure to kind of show how we look at different phases of treatment optimization in the CERCLA process. Hopefully I can get a few thumbs up that this makes sense. This kind of a key concept, and we'll be exploring each aspect of this concept as we go throughout the day. So thank you for the thumbs up. All right, next slide. We'll move right into that first phase, design optimization. The goal of design optimization is to enhance treatment operation and effectiveness while minimizing cost. These efforts begin in the FS phase and run through the record of decision and RD under CERCLA. Design optimization evaluates existing standards, constraints, design criteria, and assumptions. It also examines treatment components, processes, and control systems. Included on the right are methods that each DoD component uses to implement design optimization into their cleanup efforts. So I highlight some of those there. I also highlight some examples that Dennis provided us from Alaska as far as looking at applicable ARARs and other requirements, and that input from the Restoration Advisory Board. Some of those other key inputs to what needs to happen in your design for your optimization. All right, and with that, we'll go next slide in the Navy. So I'll introduce Nathan, and Nathan will come off, and he closed the window, so I don't get to pick on him that he's coming in from a secret location because he's not backlit anymore. That wasn't very nice of you, Nathan. All right, Nathan, take it away.
Thank you, Brian. Yes, I'm Nathan DeLong from the Navy. And as far as design optimization, the Navy really has two main policies that assist with that. The first is the Remedial Alternatives Analysis, or RAA, and the other is the Quality Document Review, which is the QDR. Now, the RAA, it's a required document for any site that is going through the initial remedy evaluation process. It really is intended to be a very short, internal to the Navy document that really is ideally completed with a minimal level of effort. So we're talking about 5 to 20 pages and really no more of a level of effort than 24 to 40 hours total. And the goal of the RAA is to get an early and quick review of the potential remedial alternatives from Navy SMEs through their review of those documents. And the main purpose of those RAAs, or the outcome that we're looking for from the RAA, is three things really. The first is reasonable development of remediation goals and strategy, ensuring that the remedial action objectives are consistent with the on-site risk for current and reasonably anticipated future land use, and incorporate a measurable progress and ensure we have a response complete strategy. And then finally, we want to make sure that the remedial alternatives that we're going to be looking at in the FS align with the RAOs, and potentially applicable remedial options are not dropped too early. Make sure that potential remedial options are not dropped too early in the selection process. On the other hand, the QDR is, it's very similar to the RAA, but there are some differences. The QDR is a required review process for any sites that directly or indirectly evaluate, select, or modify a remedy or path forward at a Navy IR site. So this means that the QDR process is going to be required to be completed for feasibility studies, proposed plans, records of decision, time-critical removal action memorandums, ECAs, and 5-year reviews. So in that sense, it's a bit broader in scope than the RAA, looking at different types of documents that look at different remedies. However, it's also a bit more restrictive in the sense that it only applies to IR sites and it does not apply to MR sites. And additionally, there are a set of specific trigger criteria that sites need to meet in order for that review to be required. And those trigger criteria are specified in the policy. However, they do include, would include sites that have, emerging issues such as PFAS, large excavations as part of one of the remedial alternatives, and sites that have large costs to complete, among other things. So ultimately, both of these policies help assist the Navy's design efforts by allowing our SMEs to take a look at the remedial alternatives early in the selection process and provide programmatic consistency in how we evaluate and select those remedies, and really help identify potential areas of design optimization, early in that circular process. So with that, I'll hand it over to Dennis Shepard to take a look at the state's perspective.
Thank you, Nathan. In Alaska, we basically look at the optimization approaches to ensure that the treatment systems are compliant with federal and state requirements, including any substantive requirements, permitting requirements that might address solid waste or movement and treatment of water, and potentially any impacts to an existing air permit or requirements that we would have for air permitting. We are also concerned with community concerns from the RABs that we have here in the state. And often the community would like to have some input as to, what types of remedies are selected. Additional considerations, looking at the site-specific issues. In Alaska, we have permafrost and wetlands concerns. Many times access is limited. And looking at the remedy footprint might include looking at the access to that area. And then, the ability to collect data to address uncertainties and contamination, migration to active zone water and surface waters are a concern for us. We have, once again, the permafrost and wetland issues to consider. And then another big issue for us here in Alaska is impacts to private property. We have large areas that are native owned or village owned properties that may have had impacts from previous DOD usage. So those are the concerns that we take into the evaluation of the remedies. Thank you. I guess back to Brian.
All right, thank you, Dennis. All right, our next phase is looking at that remedy optimization, and I'll do something similar here, run through remedy optimization. So the goal here is to enhance the implementation and operation of selected remedies to ensure cleanup objectives are effectively and efficiently achieved. Efforts include reviewing existing data such as cost, subsurface performance data, and treatment performance metrics. DoD may evaluate performance by examining progress towards cleanup goals, ability to prevent or reduce contaminant exposure and migration, and prevalence of maintenance issues. Also included on this slides are methods through which DoD components may incorporate remedy optimization in their cleanup processes. So those are on the right, and we will go over to Dr. Kent Glover with the Air Force for a discussion on remedy optimization.
Thank you. On this slide, we're highlighting 3 initiatives in the Air Force that we used for remedy optimization. The first, performance assessments, are technical reviews that validate progress toward contractual objectives and identify corrective actions when progress doesn't align with site performance models. Critical process analysis is an initiative where we identify critical remediation and fate and transport processes that are limiting progress of a remedial system. Often we recommend high-resolution site characterization to refine conceptual site models at the critical process scale and spot remedy performance problems early. And finally, recommend remedial enhancements and trigger management actions before problems become critical. And finally, network optimization, which are statistical and decision logic evaluations of monitoring networks to provide guidance for optimal and cost-effective remedy performance tracking, and to ensure that monitoring data support exit strategies for remedy completion.
Yeah, So Alaska uses ITRC guidance quite frequently. We have internal and other optimization resources as well, just to determine data needs and to verify, that monitoring parameters appropriately measure progress towards the cleanup goals. We evaluate the conceptual site model and performance data through monitoring and use that to identify any data gaps and reassess assumptions just to ensure that the remedy is performing. And then we have experienced technical staff and subject matter experts, some of which are on ITRC work groups to look at PFAS, for instance, and vapor intrusion. Alaska generally has someone on an ITRC work group at all times, it seems like, as long as I've worked here. And we can always, refer questions and pull in our subject matter experts when we have these optimization reports that we're concerned with. Thank you. Over to you, Brian.
All right, and for our last phase, monitoring optimization, I'll hand over to Carl and the Army with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
Well, hi, everybody. It's great to be here, be part of this team that's presenting on treatment optimization. So a little perspective on how the Army Corps of Engineers looks at monitoring optimization. General concept with monitoring optimization is pretty simple and straightforward. Good monitoring programs really give us the data that we need to track our treatment progress and make informed decisions about those next steps. On the flip side, the bad monitoring programs can either, cost us too much money and generate data that we don't really need to evaluate our treatment, or we can not be generating enough data that we need to be making those informed decisions. And that, simple concept is really what drives us to the goals of monitoring optimization, trying to improve our effectiveness and efficiency. A little bit more on cost. Monitoring can represent a pretty significant cost overall and level of effort. On the slide, we show, annual costs depending on size and complexity of the site in the tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars. And those costs aren't just the costs that you pay to have people go out and collect the samples and then pay to the lab to analyze. You also have those upfront costs with planning and preparation, and then on the back end you have costs associated with validating your data, reporting your data. So just another kind of reason we want to have an optimized, efficient monitoring program. And if you think about it, the goal with all treatment is to make changes at the site over time. And so our monitoring program really does need to change as our treatment progresses and those beneficial desired changes happen. Another thing that the folks doing monitoring optimization are going to look at is unanticipated changes. Maybe do we have migration of a contaminant plume into a new area? Do we have a new receptor show up that's going to require some type of new monitoring? We want to make sure that the monitoring team is looking for those kinds of anticipated and unanticipated changes, that our conceptual site models or our CSMs are being updated to reflect that and make sure that our monitoring is staying current. The outcomes of monitoring optimization are again, really straightforward. The tools and techniques that you use to get there are not as straightforward. And Dr. Glover did a good job of mentioning some of the statistical tools, network evaluation tools. We unfortunately don't have enough time to get down into those weeds, but some of the outcomes we'll see, focus areas for monitoring optimization, are things like evaluating sampling frequency. Do we need to do more sampling? Could we reduce the sampling to save costs? Are there new sampling techniques or different sampling techniques that should be employed, maybe to be more efficient with our sample collection or provide better quality data and samples? We'll also look at sampling locations. Are we sampling enough locations at the site? Do we have areas of the site where we're not sampling and we need to be? And then lastly, we'll look at, are there additional analyses that need to be done to really help us understand how our treatment system is performing? And then one last thing, again, this was something Dr. Glover also hinted at, is monitoring optimization can look at the concept of, do we have a plan in place, or do we need to develop a plan in place as we're getting close to closing our site out and being done with treatment? A lot of times for those really old sites where we've been working for years to decades, we didn't even think of what the end is going to look like. So if we're doing a monitoring optimization, it may be time to develop that plan, and we'll look at the questions and data needs listed on the slide here. Again, it's things like sampling frequency, having the right number of monitoring points, assessing if we need to do certain kinds of statistical evaluations. And so now I get to hand it back over to Dennis Shepard again to get the Alaska DEC perspective on monitoring programs. So over to you, Dennis.
Thank you. Yeah. So I have a little question for you all. How much, and maybe some of you that have been to Alaska are going to just zero right in on this one. How much do you think it costs to monitor treatment systems in Alaska using a $1 sign, $2 sign, or more dollar signs?
I see a lot of $3 signs already coming across. I don't see any
Yeah,
$1
I see
signs.
several more dollar signs coming.
Maybe they paid for a fresh apple in Alaska before and know that that's a $3 sign engagement. All right, thanks for those responses, Dennis. I think we can go on. I think we would all agree it's probably a $3 sign endeavor in Alaska.
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah, some of our unique environmental considerations for installing remedies are, we have huge temperature swings through the year. I mean, temperatures are below freezing and below 0 degrees Fahrenheit for nearly 7 months of the year here. We have a limited field season for drilling, excavation, construction, and other optimization or remedial activities. Permafrost conditions are presenting complex hydrologic challenges. There's a lot of uncertainties delineating contaminant plumes. There's a lot of times that we're trying to drill through permafrost or having permafrost influence plume dynamics. We have significant swings in the water table in sites near some of our major rivers. We can have a 30-foot difference between the summer and winter for the groundwater table. Cold weather has major impacts on VOCs and can present some real operational challenges for vapor extraction technologies. Monitoring treatment systems costs are high, basically based on where you're at in the state. Mobilization to remote sites is very expensive. There's not that many local environmental firms. And so, during the field season, it's going to be hard to get an environmental consultant to come to your site or to, undertake any kind of work activity. We have the short field seasons once again, conditions for drilling and accessing sites can be cost prohibitive. Some sites are virtually inaccessible due to wetlands, and so you might have to try and get in the winter when things are frozen up, and so it can be very challenging to work here.
We'll go slide 25. This is another little engagement opportunity. I'll propose a question to you all, look for a few answers, and then once I see a few of them I like. So hopefully you all do well with this. What are some of the hurdles to performing optimization? What do you see in your environment? What are some of the big things that you see that are hurdles when you say, oh, let's optimize that remedy? Or in the design phase, you're at the feasibility study and you're like, oh, I want to implement some level of optimization. So please, Aaron, thank you for that first response, right? Regulatory buy-off, inadequate data, great. Funding, bound by contract. Oh, that's awesome. Let me see if we can get a few more in there. What are some of the other things that we see quite often? Particularly, maybe I'll hint at a few that I have on my sheet or my punch board here. What about whenever you're in that remedy, you've been working for 10 years and you're like, wait, something doesn't make sense. What might that be? What is that element that is always conceptual right up until the very end? All right, we'll go ahead and throw some of these boxes out for you. Right. Red tape, I love that. So human resources, I think that was something that that was definitely highlighted at, and I love the question, even with the Super 8As. Well, I'll tell you, the Super 8As in Alaska, they are already planning for their field work like 2 years ahead to keep their people busy whenever that summer hits. So they're not available if you have a last second need in Alaska for a Super 8A. So those human resources are key. Go ahead in the next one. Thing is funding. Yep, funding. We've seen that multiple times here. No money. That's one way to put it. Next one. CSM understanding. Sometimes we have to go back and we have to do some additional work to really address some CSM shortfalls, particularly if our site was investigated 20 or 30 years ago using different methods and techniques than we would currently use, or even the analytical methods have changed. I remember my first Superfund site I ever worked on used a packed column method for BTEX analysis. We would never use that method now, but that was the method of the time in the early 90s. So next bucket here, contract limits. So I love that somebody threw in there contract bounds, and what is our contract? Next one. Quite often we went into scheduling issues. And then the last one I think fits with a lot of your all's understanding as well, which is data completeness, right? Do we have the right data to be looking at our optimization, or do we need to actually do that monitoring optimization before we can perform the real remedy optimization that we may need to do? Thank you all for those inputs to the chat. And then we will move to our first break. See, we're actually a little ahead of schedule, so really appreciate that. I may address one of our questions that we got early on while we're a little ahead of schedule. So we had early on, when we looked at the figure for CERCLA, and we have remedy in place, and there was an ask of whether we do a formal declaration similar to EPA. I would say I have not seen that as a big push for DoD, that we do that formal declaration of remedy in place. Usually what I've seen, my experience, again, I am speaking from very much Brian's personal experience working in the Superfund program for EPA, is that remedy in place formal declaration was one that kicked off the 5-year review calendar for EPA, and also particularly if it was a fund lead site, also kicked off in many cases the 10-year clock for when the state would need to take over the site or take over 90% of the funding of the remedy. So for EPA and a state entity, it was very important that they all settled on when they felt the remedy was in place. For DoD, because we will be carrying out the remedy throughout its life, that remedy in place declaration is less formal. We do formally identify it, but it's less formal about, oh, has the treatment system been up and running for 92% of the time or something like that. Like EPA, many of the records of decision or planning documents will identify certain criteria for remedy in place. DoD does not go through that level of a formal process. But in most of our 5-year reviews, I'll say most, if not driven by an FFA or some other document, start by the conclusion of that DD. That's when that date is, DD to 5 years to kick off our 5-year review process. So, and I'll say most again, because you all will throw in a few specific sites where that may not be the case, but most of our sites, it's from that DD date. Signature on the DD is what starts that 5-year review calendar. We'll go ahead and get started looking at optimization data needs. We kind of ended up with that discussion as far as monitoring and monitoring programs and how data really feeds those monitoring programs. And we'll talk about some of the optimization data needs. And I will hand back over to Carl, and Carl's going to kind of walk through some of what the foundations for optimization data needs are.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. And one thing I like to mention here as kind of a underlying concept for how the Army Corps of Engineers views optimization data needs is that we prefer to do our optimization with teams that are either fully independent or, you know, a blended team of independent people and people that work on the project. So with that in mind, it's really important to discuss the data that's needed to do optimization, and the quality of an optimization effort is really going to depend on that independent or semi-independent team having access to the necessary data. On this slide, I use the term data, but it's a pretty broad tent. Includes, you know, actual electronic data, but things like documents, interview information, site visits, etc. So we'll start with talking about this foundational data, and it's really the data that helps the optimization team understand the remedy that's been selected if you're at that stage of a project. So the team's going to need to have something like your record of decision, your ROD, or a comparable decision document if you're working in a different program like Brian mentioned earlier. And then for those, again, mature remedies that have been around for a long time, the team's going to need to know if there have been any changes. Hopefully those are documented in some kind of administrative process, like an explanation of significant differences. Moving on, other foundational data needs important for the optimization team are design data for remedies that are in place and operating, and potentially remedial action work plans. Stepping back, we're also going to be interested in that older site characterization data. Can be very important. One of the pretty common outcomes of optimization evaluations is that there's going to be data gaps, and having access to that site characterization data can help to validate that. So the optimization team is going to want to have access to things like the remedial investigation, the RI, and then other later stage efforts that also generate characterization data, things like pre-design investigations, design tests, post-construction reports that provide additional data as well. If there are land use controls in place, we'll want to look at whatever administrative documents implementing those land use controls. And then last thing, especially for, again, these really mature sites, 5-year reviews or periodic reviews can be a very key document. They can be great summaries that help to kind of explain the history at these mature sites that have been around for a long time, and they really can help the optimization team get up to speed quickly. Last thing on this slide and this foundational data concept is that, having access to that foundational data is key when you have an independent optimization team. They really need to understand the remedy that's been selected and implemented before they try to go about improving it. So we'll talk on the next slide about the data that we look at for that improvement process. So current remedy data, after the optimization team has digested that foundational data, they're really going to spend most of their time evaluating current data that's being generated as the treatment or the remedy is implemented. A good foundational or key document to look at when you're trying to understand current data is your quality assurance project plan, or if you're under some other type of sampling design document, you'll want to have that for the optimization team. And then periodic monitoring data is going to be key. That can be things like status reports that are prepared at some kind of regular frequency. Think of like your quarterly activity reports or your annual activity reports, or however your operations and performance data are reported. The optimization team is going to use that data to basically do an independent evaluation of how the treatment is progressing at the site. One thing I'll say, definitely a best practice if you're ever on the end of needing to provide data to an optimization team, is that having this current data in electronic format, electronic database outputs is ideal. That really saves the team from having to generate electronic data from Excel tables, or worse, like the printed PDFs. It certainly can be done, but it adds complexity and time to the optimization effort. Another current data source that'll be useful for optimization team is contracts, any modifications to those contracts, and associated costs. Having this information really is another way to help understand where the majority of the effort and the money is going on the treatment project. That really helps the optimization team focus their efforts in terms of providing recommendations for improvement. Having those site-specific costs is also really helpful if the optimization team is trying to estimate costs to implement their recommendations, or cost savings that might be seen long-term from implementing optimization recommendations. And then lastly, if you have site-specific activities that are generating things like groundwater modeling reports, you would want to look at those as well. And then we'll talk on the last slide here about what I kind of conceptualize as the supplemental remedy data that the optimization team will want to look at. So what we talked about on the first two slides, that's really data that's going to be provided to the team. But the optimization effort itself does generate some data that needs to be considered as the treatment optimization is happening. Site visits are highly encouraged in the Army Corps of Engineers whenever we're doing optimization, unless it's a site that's difficult to get to, or there's just not a lot going on at the time, and a site visit's really not worth it. During the site visit, that optimization team is going to fill out checklists specific to the type of treatment technologies that are being used. They're also going to potentially interview personnel that are doing operations and maintenance of the treatment systems, potentially property owners, regulators, or other stakeholders that are involved or have interest in the treatment system. If a site visit isn't completed, isn't completed, we definitely recommend that the team tries to look at, recent site photos to just kind of help get that ground truth understanding of the site. Other really important data that the optimization team should be looking at is correspondence from the regulators and stakeholders to the remediation project team. That can be a really important and sometimes overlooked data set that we want to look at during optimization. And speaking of kind of stakeholders and regulatory engagement, optimization can also be used as an opportunity to engage those regulators and stakeholders. As part of some of the optimizations that we've done at the Army Corps, we've conducted what we call listening sessions, or we've done facilitated panels with our regulators and stakeholders to discuss possible treatment alternatives. This was kind of that remedy design portion of optimization that Brian introduced earlier. And while we don't do that type of engagement on every optimization effort, it can be really valuable to do in the right circumstances depending on the site. And then just to wrap this all up, the optimization team really needs to be aware of what data to be asking for and what questions to ask. And so resources like that treatment optimization resource matrix that's on the DNICS website, that's a key kind of tool for those optimization teams throughout the process. So I get to hand it over to Colorado and get their perspective on the transparency and partnering. So over to you, Dustin. Thanks.
Thank you, Carl. It's a pleasure to be here today and speak to the group about how state and stakeholder inputs at Peterson Space Force Base have helped the DoD make informed decisions regarding treatment optimization. These contributions really cover several facets, and I'm going to touch on 3 of them today from a high level. Transparency, partnering, collaborative agreements under a non-time critical removal actions, and then support for technical innovations. So under transparency and partnering, the Air Force has done a great job of prioritizing transparency overall throughout their PFAS response at Peterson. Along those lines, the Air Force and the State Health Department, we continue close coordination with the broad spectrum of stakeholders in this area, including local residents, private well owners, federal, other state, county, and municipal agencies, and then of course water providers. The planning for the municipal water treatment systems was a central focus of the early coordination efforts at Peterson. And I'm speaking from the perspective of my predecessor's predecessor, if you will. This was before my time here, but following some initial challenges in getting the group assembled between 2017 and 2019, there were a number of full stakeholder roundtable forums or listening sessions, as Carl referenced. These were established and they met 3 times a year, and they involved the Air Force, the State Health Department, the EPA, County Health Department, water districts, and other stakeholders. And the meeting focus was really collaboratively identifying how, what, and where to implement water treatment solutions. And the roundtable meetings really enabled the technical exchanges between parties and organizations to align remediation goals. And ultimately, these roundtables fostered transparent communication and public engagement. We had to ensure that community concerns were being addressed. It's never good to have concerns fall on deaf ears. But as a result of these roundtables, we built long-lasting stakeholder, organizational, interagency relationships. And I personally and our team, we still rely upon these relationships today. The second one here are environmental service agreements, or ESAs, under non-time critical removal action. Department of Defense entered into multiple ESAs with local municipalities, including the 4 listed here on the slide. And these agreements really demonstrate the DoD's commitment to supporting, local water treatment systems through dedicated funding for these communities. And these collaborative agreements definitely reflect a community-focused approach to addressing known off-site impacts on these water districts. And then lastly here, pilot projects and technical innovation. Simply put, there are 15 plus pilots in play at Peterson. I believe 5 completed, 10 underway, a couple more ramping up now. One obvious primary goal is evaluation of innovative PFAS treatment technologies. That's a no-brainer. But there's a lot of other goals, media sampling, including some passive approaches, AFFF fingerprinting, PFAS leaching capabilities from soil to groundwater, and then potential identification of biomarkers for microbial communities capable of breakdown. So these pilot projects and many others really drive home the DoD's commitment to adaptive data-driven decision-making in the PFAS response. And this isn't just at Peterson, this is portfolio-wide. A number of the pilot projects that have been developed in coordination with local partners and other regional stakeholders with overarching goal of testing and validating these technologies prior to more broad implementation, of course, where applicable. We do collaborate through regular technical working group meetings with stakeholders and others in the area. Data sharing is a big thing that I want to come back to, and joint evaluation of remediation, other treatment technologies. But data sharing, it's strongly encouraged. If it's on-site data from the installation, there's no reason that couldn't be shared. Off-site private well data is trickier. As many of us know, you need to be very wary of personal identifiable information, or PII, and the many different pitfalls associated with managing that information. You definitely need to know the rules of the road of your organization. But I really can't harp on this enough. If you can, data sharing should always be pursued. And that absolutely ties back to the transparency. The Peterson RI has been progressing very well. Phase 1 of the RI report was approved in April of 2025, and we are looking forward to continued great things in El Paso County, Colorado. So rounding third, the Air Force, CDPHE, and other stakeholders in and around Peterson through concerted efforts in these 3 lanes, transparency, collaborative agreements, and then support for technical innovations, have significantly contributed to informed decision-making process, which is really enhancing the effectiveness of groundwater treatment in and around Peterson. So I just want to say thanks again for the opportunity to speak today, and I guess I'm going to be handing it back to Carl.
Yep, thanks again, Dustin. So I gave my laundry list of data needs for optimization, and Dustin did a great job of discussing the importance of regulator and stakeholder engagement. And we want to do a little bit of hear from the audience here. And having considered all that, are there any other data needs that you all think optimization teams need to be focusing on? And are there any data needs that routinely get overlooked in optimization or your perspective? So I think it's use the chat if you can to answer in on this kind of joint question here about data needs for optimization. Ryan, feel free to add anything in if necessary there.
No, great, Carl. I'd like to hear if there's some things that people maybe we didn't mention. We tried to provide a comprehensive list, but we want to just give you an opportunity if there are some things we didn't think about that maybe you could throw into the chat. Oh, that's good. Yeah, so looking at some of those other inputs that are happening in a community that definitely needs to be looked at. System performance data, yeah, I think we tried to capture that, but yeah, it's super important, particularly as new technologies come along. I know that when I first worked on Superfund sites and we saw at the 5-year review, we need to look at optimization. The contractor that was on board was always like, what technology could we implement that'd be better than what we have? But not always that, right? It was looking at the technology you have and how can I improve it. Yep, change in your exposure setting, whether it's commercial or industrial, commercial to residential, for sure. All right, thanks for some of those. We'll move into another topic we wanted to kind of highlight that DoD does, which is you know, DoD doesn't function, of course, without some way to measure what we're doing. So we'll look at metrics to evaluate optimization efforts, and I'll hand over. So thank you to Carl and Dustin for those for the discussion on remedy data or the supplemental data we need for optimization. We'll go to Nathan DeLong for metrics.
All right, thank you, Brian. Next slide, please. All right, here we go. So the Navy tracks our optimization efforts in what we call our NORM database. There is an optimization module in there for us to track our optimization efforts. And just very briefly, NORM is basically our planning and budgeting database, the official record of the Navy's program, and that optimization module is in there for us to track our optimization efforts. And before I go any further, you know, I just wanted to mention that you know, this is specifically how the Navy tracks its optimization efforts, and other DoD components track this information utilizing other methods. But you know, with the Navy, what we really want to do is we want to record, report, and recognize. So the record portion is using this module to essentially get information about our optimization efforts in there for posterity. As a former records manager colleague of mine used to say, if you don't record it, it didn't happen. So this is the way that the Navy records those optimization efforts. Then we want to take that data that's in there and report it up the chain to ASN and Chief of Naval Operations, because we want to highlight our successes, right? Optimizations are a way to you know, save money or to accelerate goals, and we want to highlight those efforts that we are doing to meet those objectives and to meet the optimization policies. Additionally, we want to recognize the folks who perform those optimizations. So actually, just very recently, we decided to put together an optimization award for RPMs and teams to try to incentivize them to keep looking at that and then recognize their accomplishments in implementing these optimization efforts. But you know, ideally, you know, optimization and reporting in this module can be done at any time. However, we have a general timeline for teams and remedial project managers to follow. Essentially, you know, optimization for us is an end of the budget year reporting item where, you know, we want to, at the end of that fiscal year, we want to look at our optimization efforts and make sure we get those in the module and report those up during our end of year brief. So, you know, that is a general timeline of what is needed for us to be ready to report that. And one thing I just wanted to mention is, you know, the Navy has several different types of working groups. One of them is the Optimization and Technology Innovation Work Group, where we have members from each of the NAVFAC regions, and they play a key part in this optimization recording, reporting, and recognizing process. All right, next slide. So as far as optimization, right, it's not a one-person show. It really does take a village to optimize your site. And what this slide really gets at is kind of the roles and responsibilities of each of those people as it relates to the Navy's process, right? So you have the Navy contractor who is there to assist the RPM as necessary in looking for any sort of opportunities where optimization could occur with the work that they're helping support the Navy on, of course, in all phases of the circle process, and to also provide some of that, those estimated calculations and other relevant data that may support that optimization effort, and being able to track those numbers and accurately report those numbers. Additionally, you have the Navy RPM, who is in charge of also helping to identify potential optimization efforts and providing that optimization data, whether it's a new optimization effort or updating data from an existing ongoing optimization effort in that norm optimization module, as I mentioned, annually at the least, but that can be done at any time. Additionally, you have the regulators who are there to also identify potential optimization opportunities at these sites and review data supporting that optimization, provide comments whether or not they agree with it or disagree, and be part of that overall team approach to implementing the optimization. And then as kind of a review on that optimization, we have that OTI workgroup member from that region provide the quality control and quality assurance for those optimization efforts relevant to their specific region. And that's really to ensure that we get as close as we can to accurate and complete data. As we know, we may optimize a site that may save, X amount of dollars, but the overall cost to complete could end up going up because there's a lot of different things that can happen at that site from time to time. So we want to make sure we capture the specific optimization data to ensure accuracy and completeness, and that OTI workgroup member plays a key role in that. Additionally, we have Navy technical support who will be the ones to help review documents, especially with the QDR and RAA policies, which I had talked about earlier, and provide those recommendations on potential optimization opportunities and efforts at relevant sites. And then finally, there's NAVFAC headquarters, where we will take all that data in the module, consolidate it, and analyze it, and then put that into our reporting briefs for the end of year submit. Next slide. So here's a quick look at the norm optimization module itself. On the right there, you can see a screenshot of the general information tab. And essentially what I want to go through here is some of the things that we have updated in recent years and set up to ensure that we have that quality of that data and completeness. For our optimization, what we really try to focus on are the goals to that optimization, one of which is the reduction in the cost to complete. So essentially saving money, having cost avoidance as part of that optimization effort. And the other one is to accelerate milestones, whether that be remedy in place, response complete, or even site closeout. Sometimes it may be worth to increase the cost to complete a site if you can get that site closeout for that site for unlimited use in the future. So it is goal focused, but based on lessons learned of previous iterations of this module, we wanted to have some business rules in place, one of which is being that we only have one optimization event per phase ongoing at a time. One of the things that we ran into in the past was optimization events would get entered and started, but then we would never have any closure for them in the module. So this was a way to ensure that. Another thing that we wanted to make sure is that we were reporting costs as totals rather than annual cost. So whatever that annual cost savings or implementation costs were, we wanted to make sure those were totals so we could accurately compare. And as a rule, for any sites that would happen to be going on in perpetuity, we would just multiply that annual cost savings or that annual implementation cost by 30, since that's how we do our budgeting as well. So those costs, whether it be implementation or the cost avoidance as a result of the optimization, should be totals. Additionally, this is where that OTI workgroup member comes back in, is have them conduct an annual third-party review of any open optimization events. To ensure that the numbers make sense, the timing makes sense, if we're still on track to implement that optimization or end that optimization at the date that we're saying it. And then also, ultimately we care about the actual cost as it relates to implementation and cost avoidance. And that only occurs once the optimization end date hits. If the optimization end date is in the future, all those costs are considered potential. So potential costs are good. They give us an idea of what we might have to spend or save in any given optimization effort, but we do really care about the actual and ensuring that we actually have an end date to that optimization effort helps us get to that actual cost. Next slide, please. We also have a impact tab as part of our module, and that kind of looks at other factors that maybe we're not as primarily focused on, but will also kind of tell the story of what was successful about optimization effort. So some of these things are showing, impacts on the environment, safety, and community as a result of certain optimizations. Right, if you, like for an example, there's if we reduced energy consumption throughout this optimization effort, or if the worker safety was impacted by changing the remedy or suggesting a different remedy, this is that place to identify those kind of like secondary effects of that optimization, secondary beneficial effects of that optimization effort. So this is that tab where we kind of capture that. Again, it's not the primary data that we're after, but it helps tell that story of all the positive things that optimization effort has accomplished. Additionally, there is if you see at the bottom of that screenshot, it asks for a record number for supporting documentation, and that is only there really to easily locate the document where some of those backup calculations to come up with these numbers and results can be found if people are interested to go into that much more detail. Next slide. Okay, so these last two slides that I have on this topic are really just an example of a optimization and how that would go into the module. This example is phase 7, a very simple, basic long-term monitoring example where you have a closed landfill with an engineered cap and soil cover. Remedy includes land use controls, maintenance, LTM sampling, 5-year reviews, typical closed landfill type of site. The site is in perpetuity. And the cost to complete is greater than 2 million. All these are made up numbers, so don't read into them too much. But the cost to complete is 2 million just because we have sampling and land use control and 5-year review requirements, essentially forever. Site closeout date is 2055, but ultimately that keeps getting pushed out as a new 30-year window happens. So the current sampling plan is to monitor and sample 7 groundwater wells twice a year at a cost of about $52,000 per year with the specific analytes listed below. Next slide, please. So we go about and perform an optimization study on this site. It's a mature site. We have lots of data, and the partnering team, which includes the Navy, its contractors, state and federal regulators, all have that discussion about, hey, we have a lot of data for this site. We have a really good idea of what is happening there, what is needed and what is not needed. So they come to agreement on an optimization effort for this site. And that agreement comes down to reducing the sampling frequency for VOCs every 5 years and metals to every 2 years. So significant savings on sampling costs, having to go out there once every 5 years for VOCs, and metals for every 2 years, as opposed to twice a year. And then we also reduce the metals to the specific contaminants of concern and eliminate dissolved metals, also saving money in that sampling effort. So as that impact, we're going to look at a $42,000 per year in cost avoidance, and then also an additional reduction in other resources, which are not shown here, but would be captured on the impact tab that I showed previously. So how that 42,000 per year cost avoidance plays out is you would multiply that by 30, and we'd get the total cost avoidance there for I believe, $1.26 million. The implementation cost in there is only an estimate of the people's review time of the updated O&M plans for that landfill. And of course, we identify our goal was to improve life cycle cost, and the success indicator of that goal is reduction in O&M frequency. Additionally, as you can see, there's some text boxes below there where you can add additional detail to further tell the story of that optimization effort. And I did see the question that just popped up, getting rid of dissolved metals. It's just an example. There's no reason, we just put that in there as something for this example. With that, I think we're going to get into some optimization success stories, and we'll start out with Dennis Shepard from Alaska to get us started on success stories.
Thanks, Nathan. I guess we can go to the next slide. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about the former Galena forward operating location. It's an Air Force BRAC site in Galena, Alaska. The Air Force used optimization guidance from AFSI in 2000 for the 2001 guidance, United States Air Force Environmental Restoration Program, guidance on soil vapor extraction optimization from the Brooks Air Force Base, Texas. Next slide. The remedy that was installed for two source areas. The SSO6 site was a former liquid oxygen plant. That's the site just to the north there in the slide. And then the SS19 was a refueler maintenance shop. These two sites had similar contaminants of concern, DRO and PAHs in the surface soils, and TCE contamination in surface soil, subsurface, and groundwater. Soil concentrations were up to 1900 milligrams per kilogram in the beta zone, and variably saturated zone up to 6 milligrams per kilogram in saturated zone soils. Groundwater was contaminated up to 7,600 micrograms per liter at 50 feet, up to 40,000 micrograms per liter historically documented for this site. The cleanup levels for this site are the Alaska cleanup levels, table C groundwater cleanup levels. The remedy was installed in 2018, excavation of the DRO and PAHs, and then installation of permeable reactive barriers, upgrading of SSO6 because we have changes in groundwater, so we have a losing river to a gaining river situation. So there was an up gradient PBR installed. And then one just down gradient from the SSO6 area, and then one just down gradient of SS19. And the permeable reactive barriers were 24 injection points each on 10-foot centers, emulsified vegetable oil, calcium sulfate, and KB1 microbial culture containing dihalicoides were injected. We move to slide 43, please. In 2019, a soil vapor extraction system was installed to address the chlorinated volatile compounds. There were 51 wells put in. 38 were shallow wells to address the shallow soils to about 15 feet, and then 13. And those had, pretty close radius of influence to about 20 feet, shown there on the left-hand slide. And then the right-hand slide is showing the 13 deeper vent wells that were installed up to 30 feet of depth to address the deeper contamination. If we could go back to slide 42 for a minute and take a look at the cross section for this area. I want to point out the water table, the blue dashed lines across here. That's indicating the lower line indicating the groundwater elevation during the winter, and the upper blue line indicating the groundwater elevation during summer months. And so there's about a 30-foot smear zone there that affects the operation of the SVE system. And so the system is seasonally shut down during high groundwater every year, such that the only portions of the system being run during the summer months are those shallow wells. So they are basically optimizing the system by running and maintaining higher flow rates from the shallow system during the summer. And then during the winter months, the rest of the system can be turned on for those deeper vent wells. Optimization has included discontinuing the just passive venting. They tend to not do anything during winter except freeze up. There are also concerns, during winter months for the blower downtimes, blower run times at 70 to 80%, and sometimes a little lower. It's very difficult to maintain the system because there are no people that are qualified to run the system in Galena, Alaska. So someone has to be mobilized and fly in to do that maintenance. And another interesting thing, optimization that was done at the design phase based on community concerns for TCE vapor pooling in the breathing zones in occupied areas during cold weather. The exhaust vents for the system were extended to 30 feet above the surface to allow for more mixing and to get above that the areas where wind can interact. If we could back out on that slide a little bit to show the full area. And so you can see how many buildings there are in this area. So there's a lot of activity. There's a school that runs there during the winter. So there was a large community concern there. After 5 years of running this system, you can see where the core of the plume is now. The core extended nearly to the foot of the plume as shown there. We have reduced contaminant mass in the SSO6 area by 1.7%. And then the mass was reduced in the SS19 area by 10%. And that's reflective of the coarser grain sands and gravels in that area. And also the fact that we're able to, we have less tight grain soils that are holding a large proportion of the mass in the SSO6 area. Expecting rebound from that tight grain soil. We're going to continue running the system and optimizing the system and evaluating the remedy.
we'll go ahead and move on to Dr. Glover with the Air Force and the success story, Air Force Plant 4.
All right, thank you. So this is a story of a 8-year process to transition a cleanup program from a series of active remedial approaches with minimal long-term success to a less costly approach emphasizing monitor natural attenuation with a technical impracticability waiver and source zone mass reduction. It kind of shows how good data analysis coupled with the application of innovative characterization and some committed partnering with regulatory agencies work to develop a cleanup strategy that has meaningful and realistic objectives. So let's go to slide 45, the next one, please. Okay, so Air Force Plant 4 is an aircraft manufacturing facility on the west side of Fort Worth in Texas, and it's a Superfund site. And there's a number of TCE and mixed DNAPL source areas beneath and adjacent to the facility that feed large groundwater plumes in shallow alluvium. Over the years, a number of remediation technologies have been implemented either in pilot or full scale, as shown on the slide here. At the two landfills west of the complex and the associated plumes, both ex situ and in situ treatment technologies have reduced but not eliminated a DNAPL mass while having minimal impact on down gradient groundwater concentrations. TCE associated with landfills also has converted to DCE and vinyl chloride. At Chrome Pit 3 in the southwest part of the map there, in situ chemical oxidation was particularly successful in knocking down TCE concentrations, but made the situation worse with respect to hexavalent chromium, as you might imagine. Under building 181, at the south end of the complex, soil vapor extraction and electrical resistance heating was effective in addressing a large source of TCE DNAPL, but subsequent polishing efforts by in situ technologies have proven or were ineffective in meeting cleanup goals. While within the down gradient plumes in the east parking lot, and further east near the property boundary with Carswell Naval Air Station, zero-valent, remediation technologies included a pump and treat, phytoremediation, a zero-valent iron permeable reactive wall. It was later converted to an enhanced in situ bioremediation wall. So a lot of different technologies. In 2014, the EPA did not concur with the results of a 5-year review, concluding that the remedy was not protective and required the Air Force to update the remedial action objectives and the technical approach in the ROD. Let's go to the next slide, please. So this slide is a high-level summary of the hydrogeology and contaminant distribution of Air Force Plant 4. Within the shallow alluvial aquifer, the actual facility sits on a groundwater divide shown in red on the figure, with groundwater flowing both westward toward a small creek that discharges to the north to Lake Worth and eastward toward the Trinity River. Alluvium separated from a large regional important drinking water aquifer within the Paluxy bedrock formation by a limestone and clay confining unit called the Walnut Goodland. Unfortunately, the walnut is weathered and fractured in the vicinity of the landfill source area and appears to be missing entirely in an area just east of the building 181, which has become known as the east parking lot window. The current extent of TCE migration, both west and east of the divide, is shown in the figure on the right, with smaller plumes of DCE and vinyl chloride showing as well. This plume distribution reflects the net effect of many remediation efforts, as I mentioned in the previous slide, and those remediation efforts were focused on addressing DNAPL in source areas, trying to prevent migration through that east parking lot window and at the toes of the eastern plumes. Next slide, please. Let's see. Yes. So in 2014, 2015, AFCEC Technical Support Division conducted a series of remedy evaluations at the Air Force Plant 4 through a enterprise-wide initiative that we call the Complex Site Initiative. These CSI remedy evaluations looked at three things. Was the conceptual site model adequate at the scale of the remediation systems? Was it adequate to support optimization? What are the critical fate and transport processes that control source zone depletion and plume migration? And were the remedial systems in place at the time effective and progressing towards some cleanup goals? And what we learned is kind of shown in these two boxes. In the east parking lot and associated down gradient plume, we saw a remarkably uniform rate of TCE degradation regardless of efforts to accelerate cleanup through aggressive treatment. Furthermore, we found that long-term effectiveness of any remedy was no greater than the effectiveness of natural attenuation. Process controlling long-term remedy effectiveness and plume migration was in fact slow matrix diffusion, or back diffusion as it's often called. In the DNAPL source areas, shown on right there, initial efforts to remove the NAPL mass were highly effective, but progress slowed. Polishing efforts using in situ methods proved ineffective, and we saw concentration rebound. Let's go to slide 48. So after about 3 months or so of 4 months of detailed evaluations of remedial approaches implemented at these various areas, we came away with 3 critical hypotheses or ideas that we believe controlled remedy effectiveness. One idea was to decrease source area contaminant mass to the extent practical and control mass flux from those areas. Second was active plume remediation efforts and technologies were only minimally effective because of back diffusion. Most of the remaining contaminant mass at the site is tied up in relatively immobile fraction of the porous media. And third, in the vicinity of the source areas and the eastern parking lot window, the geological characteristics of the upper Paluxy Formation provided what we thought was good geological containment and protection of the regional drinking water aquifer. So based on these findings, we recommended a transition from use of active treatment technologies to a strategy of M&A and technical impracticability waivers. We thought we had a basis for TI waivers in 3 source areas. As you'll see, we did not get all 3, but we got one. And we recognized that transitioning to M&A would require remedial action objectives with a long time to attain cleanup goals. But because the future use of the site is going to continue being an aircraft manufacturing facility, a long-term cleanup time was acceptable to everyone. We also recommended conducting a more detailed mapping of plume configuration to demonstrate regional aquifer protectiveness and M&A effectiveness than was possible using the available monitoring network. We recommended conducting sequence stratigraphy mapping to demonstrate protectiveness of the regional drinking water aquifer in the area of that window and elsewhere. And finally, we funded several innovative characterization projects to substantially improve the conceptual site model at the scale of the remediation systems by delineating preferential pathways, mapping TCE mass distribution and flux, and refining our understanding of matrix diffusion or back diffusion. Yeah, let's go to the next slide. 49. Yeah, there we go. So after a summer of detailed remedy evaluations, the hard work was just getting started, really. And as the title of this slide shows, that work took about 6 years. We were fortunate that the RPM, the Air Force RPM at the installation and the regulatory agencies, the EPA and the Texas CEQ, had a good working relationship that allowed us to operate in an open, transparent, data-driven environment. We also had an existing remediation site contractor who was willing to work with us to rework performance objectives in their contract. And as a result, we were able to fill monitoring network data gaps, verified geological control for minimal migration into the underlying regional drinking water aquifer and to conduct detailed M&A and TI evaluations and a focused feasibility study. We also funded some innovative high-res projects to refine the conceptual site model and demonstrating that the shale within the upper part of the Paluxy formation would effectively control deep migration through the parking lot window and beneath the landfill DNAPL source area as well. Another project mapped contaminant mass flux and distribution, demonstrating that back diffusion minimizes the value of active treatment technologies. Another project looked at enhancing DNAPL conceptual site model for the landfill west of the facility and evaluating natural source zone depletion as a remediation approach. And finally, a project mapped, did a wonderful job of mapping preferential migration pathways in detail by hydrogeophysical tomography near the off-base Carswell area, with the idea that if we needed to optimize active remedy approaches, that would be where we'd have to come in. And if the M&A just wasn't going to do the job, now we had a detailed understanding of how to implement a remedy. Slide 50, please. Here we go. So transition to M&A and current status. This slide summarizes where we are today. In 21-22, the focused feasibility study and TI evaluations were completed. In 23, a ROD amendment was signed that formalized the strategy and goals that we talked about here in this case study. And in 24 and today, then work plan was prepared and is now being implemented to include annual M&A reports. So last slide, slide 51. This sort of lists your take-home messages from this case study for how to transition to M&A from an active remedy project. It's important to identify critical processes for contaminant fate and transport, as well as evaluate remedy effectiveness. It's important to refine that conceptual site model and invest in high-resolution site characterization to identify preferential pathways, natural attenuation rates, back diffusion limitations, and the like. Demonstrate source mass reduction and control is important. The evaluation of long-term effectiveness of active remedies is something that one needs to clearly do in order to make this transition, and identify area specific and time specific remedial action objectives that allow us to transition to M&A where long time frames to meet RAOs were acceptable, and to seek TI waivers with source mass reduction and control where they're appropriate. That allows us then to focus active remedies in areas requiring short times to clean up. And finally, it's if you're going to do a transition like this, regulatory involvement is pretty basic and fundamental to the whole process, and transparency of communication. So I think with that, Brian, I turn it back over to you, right?
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Glover. So open discussion. We'd hope to have a little more time, but we're right at about 4 minutes left. But Dr. Glover, we did have one question in the chat. I thought you could provide a pretty quick answer for the reopener question.
Oh, yeah,
Maybe,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you want to go ahead and highlight that.
Yeah, we've had a number of sites that over the years have reopened, and it's some of it's been driven by performance-based contracting and bidders to come in and try and bid more than some minimum requirement. But one example came to mind, and it's a sort of a satellite facility from Tinker Air Force Base outside of Oklahoma City. And this facility had a remedy in. It was a pump and treat, and then an M&A and long-term management type of a remedy. And then the installation decided that they didn't need that satellite property, but there was then tremendous benefit if we could get complete closeout and walk away with unrestricted use at the site. And so the we basically reopened the site again after essentially being in long-term management. And the contractor came in, put in and it's a layered system. There's like 3 or 4 different, it's a thick aquifers, a stack of aquifers, and they're all, a number of them are contaminated. So the contractor came in and put in a recirculating bioreactor where pump water from one part of the aquifer, recirculated back up through the soil zone and get treatment, biological enhanced reductive dechlorination, a TCE problem. And that did an amazing job in that shallow aquifer. Unfortunately, it's been less successful, in propagating with depth. And so the site's still open. We're still working it. But that's the example that came to mind. So the fundamental idea is that, objectives for how you want to manage the site and what you want to do with the property has forced us to go back in and reopen sites.
No, thank you for that, Dr. Glover. And I'll offer up some closing remarks before people have to jump. I know many of you probably at the close of the hour will need to jump. Just a reminder again, please fill out that survey. And here's the link for it. One of the things we do ask in that survey, we had to really compress. I had hoped to do more case studies and have that discussion, but we also wanted to balance the amount of material we were trying to provide to understand the case studies. And one of those survey questions is, would you like to see a webinar in the future to look at a more open discussion on case studies? I think that'd be valuable to the community. And it's something that DoD could pull together a few more case studies to present and help work through and talk about optimization in a more of a case study format. And I think I know that people are like, yes, I want to see the case studies. I want to see the lessons learned, because I don't want to have to learn those lessons the hard way. But after I've spent $1 million, right? Completely understand. But we just felt that this treatment optimization webinar, we need to give that background, and hopefully with it being recording, folks can go look at that. And if we do that case study type webinar, we can come back and just jump right into quick introduction and jump right into case studies. And if you guys are interested, so please, if you are, fill out the survey, let us know that you really want to see those case studies. And again, I really appreciate everybody joining us. We're right at 4 o'clock. Look forward to seeing you at other webinars that I may give, or in the future, if it's somebody else, hopefully you'll attend their webinars and we'll get to see how everything, and maybe we'll do a webinar on case studies. So thank you all.